Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about Lancaster Castle. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? Hope everyone is doing good. So I am drinking tonight. Like I had mentioned the last time, I think I had gotten this wine before, but I got it again for Christmas, and it is the 19 Crimes Snoop Dogg Cali Red blend wine. And I think I had mentioned that it was a little too strong the last time, so I tried something that I was like looking on Pinterest, and I don't know. To me, it didn't really make much of a difference, but it's fine. I'm drinking it. So what I did was just like muddle blueberries, and then I put some in the wine, and then I put some lime sparkling water. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a spritzer or something. I'm drinking it, I'm sipping it. And then I am just wearing a bright orange Halloween Michael Myers sweatshirt. It's a little chilly tonight. So let's get started. So this episode is going to be about the Lancaster Castle, and I actually got this recommendation from Sean over at Beyond the Norm, and he is also the co-host of the new podcast Haunted and Strange. He co-hosts that with Amanda, and she's great too. She's Northern Siren. I think I can link them below if you want to follow them, but they just started a new podcast and it's really good, so you should go listen to that. But anyways, so Sean, I did my episode on Anne Boleyn, and he mentioned Lancaster Castle, Lancaster in general, which is where he lives. They have so much history and everything. And so he mentioned about the castle being haunted. So I'll be talking about the castle, its history, the witches, and the ghosts that have said to be seen at the castle. Let's get started talking about that. The dark history of Lancaster Castle is long and harsh. Lancaster Castle, often known as John o' Gaunt's Castle, is one of the most historically fascinating surviving buildings in the country. Its beginnings date back to the Roman times. Owned by the Duchy of Lancaster, His Majesty King Charles III is the Duke of Lancaster. The castle has witnessed scenes of significant historical, cultural, and political importance throughout the centuries. These include incidents of religious persecution, the trials of Lancashire witches, and over 200 executions for everything from murder to stealing cattle. Until 2011, it was fully functioning HM prison, and today it is a magnificent living monument, offering a glimpse into England's often dark past through tours and special events enjoyed by modern-day visitors of all ages. The Duchy of Lancaster is an ancient inheritance that began 750 years ago in 1265. In 1399, Henry IV passed a royal charter which decreed that the duchy would be a distinct entity held separate from all other crown possessions and handed down through the monarchy. So it remains to this day. The monarch is always the Duke of Lancaster. Lancaster Castle was first used as a prison in 1196, although this role became more important during the English Civil War. In the late 18th century, the castle began to be converted into a prison. The first phase commenced in 1788 with the erection of the Gaoler's House, followed by the female prison in 1792, and in 1794, the new male prison. There were 48 single-occupancy cells, as at this time it was considered essential for each prisoner to have their own cell. The prisoner was taken over by the Home Office in 1877. It reopened as a normal prison in 1954. It has been said that the prisoners were sentenced to death at Lancaster Assizes than at any other court outside of London, Lancaster becoming known as the hanging town in consequence. It is still being used for its original purpose today, Next to the dungeons is Hadrian's Tower, part of the original defensive structure which used to house the lunatic asylum, and where there is now an exhibition of instruments of torture and restraint, including long and short striding chains used on prisoners who were deported to Australia. Also on display in the Shire Hall is the branding iron used to mark criminals as wrongdoers or malefactors, and the drop room, now used as the jury room, where after the year 1800 prisoners were brought before being taken through the door to their public hanging, a spectacle witnessed by thousands, including children from the local grammar school who were given the morning off to watch. Before 1800, prisoners were taken to Gallows Hill near Williamson Park to be executed, though they were allowed to stop on the way at the Golden Lion pub for one last drink. The prisoners were brought into the drop room from the condemned cells to be pinioned and say their final prayers before being led forward through the inward opening French doors straight into the balcony-style gallows. The gallows would have been erected the previous afternoon and consisted of two uprights that were seated into holes cut into the flagstones of the courtyard. A heavy crossbeam ran between the uprights with a platform containing the trap-doors beneath it at the level of the bottom of the French doors, the platform being draped in a black cloth to hide the legs of the prisoners. High railings surrounded the drop area, and the spectators were allowed up to these, within a few feet of the gallows. Many more crowded onto the opposite bank to get a good view of the proceedings. All the public executions used the short drop method, of course, so death seldom came without a struggle. After the bodies had hung for an hour, they were taken off the rope and brought in through the small lower window. After 1868, the law required all executions to be in private, and these took place in the chapel yard up against the chapel steps. An execution shed was built circa 1900 in the yard immediately behind the wall of the hanging corner, and this still existed when the prison reopened. It is possible that the gallows may have still been in existence in this shed until the late 1950s. Between 1800 and 1865, a total of 213 people were executed at Lancaster Castle. 6 men were hanged in private between 1875 and 1910. Prior to 1800, all Lancashire executions had taken place on Gallow Hill on the moors outside of Lancaster's southern gate, in what is now Williamson Park. In the reign of James I, there was a great fear of witches, and many women who seemed a little out of the ordinary were rounded up and accused. One of the most famous trials held at the castle was that of the Pendle witches in 1612. It was here that the hanging of 9 of the 10 Pendle witches were carried out. The other one was hanged at York. They were convicted of witchcraft on the basis on having caused the deaths of 17 people in and around the forest of Pendle. As in most other county towns at the time, the condemned were taken to the gallows in a cart, seated on their coffin, and turned off from the back of the cart. Prior to 1834, there was as many as 20 felonies, not just murder, that typically resulted in execution. Of the 213 hangings between 1800 and 1865, only 43 were for murder. 44 people died for burglary, others for highway robbery, uttering, arson, and sheep and horse theft. The first hanging at the castle took place after the Lent Assizes of 1800, when 6 men were to die on Saturday, April 19th of that year. They were messengers John Brady, John Burns, and James Weldon for robbing the mail, all three of who were afterwards hanged in chains at Ashton. Samuel Bradford, George MacDonald, and Paul Hargreaves for the crime of uttering, which is passing forged banknotes. Saturday was the normal execution day at Lancaster, although the major part of the castle is still in use as a prison. You can visit the law courts, the Shire Hall, with its display of heraldic shields, and the dungeons. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Pendle witches. Probably the most notorious witch trial of the 17th century, the legend of the Pendle witches is one of the many dark tales of imprisonment and execution at Lancaster Castle. 12 people were accused of witchcraft. One died while in custody. 11 went to trial. One was tried and found guilty at York, and the other 10 were tried at Lancaster. Only one was found not guilty. It was an unusual trial in that it was documented in an official publication, The Wonderful Discoveries of Witches in the County of Lancaster, by the Clerk of the Court, Thomas Potts. As it was well documented, the story has remained as a well-known legend. Also, just over 3 centuries saw witch trials held in England, but fewer than 500 people were executed for this crime. This one series of trials in the summer of 1612 therefore accounts for 2% of all witches executed. It is important to understand the background to the events of these trials. 6 of the 11 witches on trial came from 2 rival families, the Demdike family and the Chaddocks family, both headed by old poverty-stricken widows, Elizabeth Southerns, aka Old Demdike, and widow Mother Chaddocks. Old Demdike had been known as a witch for 50 years. It was an accepted part of village life in the 16th century that there were village healers who practiced magic and dealt in herbs and medicines. The extent of the wave of witchcraft reported in Pendle at this time perhaps reflected The extent of the wave of witchcraft reported in Pendle at this time perhaps reflected the large amounts of money people could make by posing as witches. Indeed, it was a time when witchcraft was not only feared but also fascinated those from common village folk to King James I. James I had been greatly interested in witchcraft even before he took the throne in 1603, even writing a book, Demonology, instructing his readers to condemn and persecute both supporters and practitioners of witchcraft. The skepticism of the king became reflected in the feelings of unrest about witchcraft among the common people. The king's views were also imposed on the law. Each justice of the peace in Lancashire at the beginning of the year of 1612 were instructed to compile a list of all those who refused to attend church or take communion, which was a criminal offense. Lancashire had been regarded as a wild and lawless society, possibly related to the general sympathy with the Catholic Church. During the dissolution of monasteries, the people of Pendle Hill openly opposed the closure of the nearby Cistercian abbey and reverted straight back to Catholicism when Queen Mary came to the throne in 1553. The region of Lancashire was thought of as where the Church was honored without much understanding of its doctrines by the common people. It was with this background of unease that the 2 judges made their investigations and sentenced the Pendle witches. The story began with an altercation between one of the accused, Allison Device, and a peddler, John Law. Allison, either traveling or begging on the road to Trodden Forest, passed John Law and asked him for some pins. It is not known whether her intention was to pay for them or whether she was begging. He refused, and Allison cursed him. It was a short while after this that John Law suffered a stroke, for which he blamed Allison and her powers. When this incident was brought before Justice Nowell, Allison confessed that she had told the devil to lame John. It was upon further questioning that Allison accused her grandmother, old Demdike, and also members of the Chattox family of witchcraft. The accusations on the Chattox family seem to have been an act of revenge. The families had been feuding for years, perhaps since one of the Chattox family broke into the Malkin Tower, the home of the Demdikes, and stole goods. Furthermore, John Device, father of Allison, blamed the illness that led to his death on old Chattox, who had threatened to harm his family if they did not pay annually for their protection. The deaths of 4 other villagers that had occurred years before the trial were raised, and the blame laid on witchcraft performed by Chattox. James Demdike confessed that Allison had also cursed a local child some time before, and Elizabeth, although more reserved in making accusations, confessed her mother had a mark on her body, supposedly where the devil had sucked her blood, which left her mad. On further questioning, both old Demdike and Chattox confessed to selling their souls. Also, Anne, Chattox's daughter, was allegedly seen to create clay figures. After hearing this evidence, the judge detained Allison and old Demdike and old Chattox and waited for trial. The story would have ended there had it not been for a meeting held in Malkin Tower by James Device, Allison's brother, for which he stole a neighbor's sheep. Those sympathetic to the family attended, but the word reached the judge, who felt compelled to investigate. As a result, a further 8 people were summoned for questioning and then trial. The trials were held at Lancaster between the 17th and 19th of August in 1612. Old Demdike never reached trial. The dark, dank dungeon in which they were imprisoned was too much for her to survive. 9-year-old Janet Device was a key supplier of evidence for the Pendle witches' trial, which was allowed under the system from King James. All normal rules of evidence could be suspended for witch trials. Someone so young would not have been able to supply key evidence normally. Janet gave evidence against those who attended the meeting in Malkin Tower, but also against her mother, sister, and brother. When she gave evidence against Elizabeth, her mother, Elizabeth had to be removed from court, screaming and cursing her daughter. Some of the Pendle witches seemed to be genuinely convinced of their guilt, whereas others fought to clear their names. Allison Device was one of those who believed in her own powers, and was also the only one on trial who was faced with one of their victims, John Law. When John entered the court, it is documented that Allison fell to her knees, confessed, and burst into tears. In conclusion, it seemed to be a range of exceptional circumstances that led to the extent of these witch trials. Indeed, Lancashire was exceptional in the number of witch trials that were held, in comparison to other regions who experienced the same degree of social depravity. The money that could be made from claiming powers in witchcraft in the 17th century probably caused the declarations made by the 2 families. They may have been in competition for the best reputation in the area. This backfired, and the wild accusations escalated, fueled by a general feeling of unrest and fear of witchcraft across the country, making this the biggest and most notorious witch trial. Now we're going to talk about the ghost and the hauntings. Lancaster Castle is rumored to be one of the most haunted places in the city. It has served as a prison, a courthouse, and even a place of execution. Visitors and staff have reported ghostly apparitions, mysterious sounds, and eerie occurrences in various parts of the castle. There are many ghosts of Lancaster Castle. With over 1,000 years of macabre history, you never know who you will encounter. Tour guides have heard hushed whispers and the sound of footsteps in the courtroom. While locking up one night, one of them became aware of something by her side. She heard a high-pitched sound. Blue orbs have been seen with the naked eye in the cell where the Pendle witches were held before their trial. Crying was also heard from the barrister's library. On Monday, January 28, 2013, security footage captured a shadowy figure walking inside the gatehouse entrance. Daytime visitors often report being pushed, and staff have come to accept this as a common event. Nobody has been hurt, but maybe the ghosts of Lancaster Castle are putting their stamp on this old building. With more than 200 prisoners executed on this site, it is no wonder so much paranormal activity is experienced here. Legend talks of a monk who haunts the prison grounds. He is believed to have been hanged at the prison and is usually seen at ground level of the castle. His presence is often followed by an icy chill and has so far only been witnessed at night. Past inmates and prison officers have seen the apparition of a young girl. Her appearance is usually accompanied by another woman, sometimes middle-aged and sometimes old and haggard. Many times, the girl has been heard running along the corridors of the prison, which was occupied until 2011. During the 1612 trials of the Pendle witch trials, Old Demdike died in one of the cells. Her spirit is believed to be responsible for much of the ghostly activity in the old cell within the well tower. So that is the history, a little bit of history on the Lancaster Castle and the Pendle witches, the ghost and paranormal stuff that is said to happen there. Let me know what y'all think. If you've heard of Lancaster Castle, if you've heard of the Pendle witches, let me know. And go give a listen to the Haunted and Strange podcast with Sean and Amanda. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you.
Are you into weird shit? Yeah?
You into cryptids?
What about hauntings? Yeah, I've got a ghost for you.
Oh, you like otherworldly beings?
Me too. Check out all these aliens. We have plenty. How do you feel about a good legend?
Want to hear about spooky happenings?
Yeah, you do.
Let us show you what we've got.
Hey guys, grab a drink and join us, Amanda and Sean, every week while we dive into the strange and haunting topics that have piqued our interest.
See you over at The Haunted and the Strange, wherever you get your podcasts.
Stay spooky.